Is there such a thing as cyber morality?
Hello, and welcome to the show. More colourful conversations with Mark and Pete. This is the show dedicated to religion, politics, and business. Each week, clergyman Pete and businessman Mark debate an important topic. On this week's programme, we ask the question, breaking the moral code. What is the true cost of cyber crime? It's quite remarkable that financial institutes have seen a plethora of hacking incidents that have happened throughout the year. And in fact, just to illustrate this, that they have issued many statistics which has revealed that millions of pounds of money has actually been stolen. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, one of the fastest areas of crime is cybercrime. In fact, in 2014, £60 million was lost as a result of this type of crime. And in fact, in 2015, it's projected to be over £130 million. That's a staggering amount of money. But what is more important is that the losses to consumers alone is estimated at something like a life-changing £90,000 per individual in some cases. Well, what is causing this moral code to be infringed? Well, I've got a little poem which will raise some thoughts. And this is a poem called Faith Not Found, Fatal Error Code. Fiddle-dee-dee, there's a digital spree, crookedly cracking every moral code. It's meddled with the likes of you and me, and society is about to implode. Double trouble-dee-boo, what shall we do? The virtual dastardly demons are rife. Religion and culture has been rewritten too. Corruption is the new language of life. Gobble-de-gog, what is the virtual squad? Perhaps it's been hijacked like hacked HTML. Our good DNA is reset to look odd. Are we now all programmed for hell? Source, Armageddon. Well, clergyman Pete, what do you think is the true cost of crime and a cyber world that we live in?
Well, in this virtual world of cyberland, all those sort of words, cyber, virtual, are sort of distancing, aren't they? It makes it feel as if what you do in that cyber world, that virtual world, the world of computers, the world of the internet, is somehow less real than other forms of communication. But of course, that's not true at all. The method of communication does not change the fact that you're simply communicating with other people, or you're communicating with computers that have been set up by real people. So the real people involved somewhere. And if you commit a crime in this virtual world, if you commit a cybercrime, it's still a real crime affecting real people and done by real persons. So when you're talking about cybercrime, I guess it's not really a cybercrime unless it's the computer who's actually committed the crime. And I don't know of any computers that have been, at least not have been actually sent to prison for their crimes. But maybe there have been some that have been under investigation. I don't know. But
No.
but if we're talking about people, then it's a real crime, isn't it? Because the method of doing it is just one of many methods of committing a crime. So the true cost, whatever it is going to be very real.
Well, I mean, to that point, computers are merely the instrument of torture. And yes, it is true that people are behind that crime. And to that very point, I wanted to raise something which is even more alarming. So when we think of cybercrime, we think of terrorist organizations or criminal gangs that are just there to basically victimize individuals, whether that's people in society or even businesses. But remarkably, what was seen fairly recently is a 15-year-old British boy had been charged over cyber attacks on international websites and even bomb hoaxes against US airlines. So the fact that it can be done from a bedroom to other groups which are much more advanced is quite an alarming statistic. And really, I guess the question is, what's happened to society that breaks these moral codes literally to really sort of make us so vulnerable to this type of criminal behavior?
Well, what's happened there, the situation you just described, which we recognise from the effect of the internet, it being so easy to have access to, for example, someone's private information or a company's supposedly secure information. What that does is it amplifies the effect of already breaking a moral code. So the boy in his bedroom who's using his computer to do this crime, he may well in the past, have stolen some money from his mum's purse, and still just as wrong. But now he's able to steal, maybe millions from a company. He may have in the past, been naughty and pushed someone off their bike. Now he can cause an aircraft liner to go off course. What he's done is it's amplified his wrongdoing to a greater level. But the wrongdoing was already there. So the moral code in question was already in place. Say we take the moral code as being, for example, do not steal. The first suggestion I had was taking money from his mother's purse. He's still stolen, whether it's from his mother's purse or from someone's bank account. It's the same crime or the same sin that's been committed. It's just that it's amplified. Now, there's a whole question about whether you think that that's worse, whether a sin is worse or a crime is worse because of its effect. Certainly crimes tend to be punished on a sliding scale depending on the effect. If you steal a lot of money, you're punished more than if you steal a small amount of money. But that doesn't mean that it's any more wrong.
No. But, I mean, here's a point where we talk about crime and we talk about stealing of money. It could be stealing of course, identity. But when we think about money, which obviously affects everyone, I mean, here's an alarming point, that one of the largest banks in the United Kingdom, RBS, revealed that between January and September of 2015, almost 5,000 customers fell victim to scams at a cost of more than £25 million. Crucially, the bank says that the average loss was £13,000 and warned that 70% of its customers who were scammed do not get a single penny back. The point being is that whilst we think that we're protected, and as vigilant as we will try to be as consumers and users of financial institutes, there isn't necessarily the mechanism that we can actually really protect ourselves. But I think that there is a better method. But first of all, what do you say to the victims? What do we give as advice there to the victims?
Oh, for the victims of cybercrime, well, I think we just have to reiterate that a crime is still a crime, and you need to treat it in the same way. So, if someone has committed a crime against you, they should be punished. They should be subject to the law, and the same as if they've committed the crime in a more traditional manner. You should be liable to getting your money back if you've lost it. Still the same structures are in place. The problems would come from that side if it's an international crime, which often it can be over the internet. But talking about victims, I mean, the first thing to say is to say, look, defend yourself. You would lock up your house, so make sure your virus checkers are up to date.
Yes.
Make sure that you have your firewall in place. Make sure that you take reasonable steps to make sure that your passwords can't be cracked. Change them reasonably often. Don't choose words as your password. Take sensible steps to keep yourself secure, and don't give up your personal information. That's the final point I was going to make, unless it's to a really trusted website with a secure connection.
Well, I want to raise a point here, which is something that I've experienced by some financial institutes, which seems to be a technique which seems to not being upheld. And it's a simple technique. When we look at, say, for example, banking, we're all very familiar that if we pay for things over the internet, you're right, you need to make sure that your password is correct and that you are using trusted sites or trusted sources. Now, banks in the past have actually used simple techniques that if you, say, for example, set a level, a threshold, I'll just put a token figure on it, say £100, that anything can happen where payment can be made from your account for £100. However, the simple technique is that if your nominated £100 is broken and it goes over, so £101 and above, the simple technique is that a separate alert comes from the bank to a nominated source, whether it's an email or a phone, and alerts you that a certain transaction is happening. Effectively, it's going into a holding position, and no monies will actually leave your account until you verify that payment. Now, you might argue, well, that's a bit of a delay, it's a bit of a nuisance. But I would say that that simple technique is within our technological realm today. It's not asking a new piece of technology. It's just a simple technique. But what I have noticed is that very few banks will uphold that policy. And it's not just about banks. It could be retailers. So, for example, if you have a retail account, if your card is hacked or if your email is hacked, it's possible that your data could be stolen and you may not be aware of it. You're an unsuspecting victim, and of course that's a problem, because if you as a consumer make the transaction or perceived transaction, the financial institute, and this is the point that RBS was saying essentially, that a lot of victims do not get a single penny back because essentially they don't know that it's not via a trusted source, because the right passwords are already being used, the right pins are being used, etc. So if you have a simple technique where you set a threshold, that idea of a safe mechanism, i.e. a double verification, I think is something that could be put in place. There are many other things that can be done. Now, businesses, I think, would welcome this. We have many other techniques in business, without revealing all the sources, where you can actually ensure that no monies are left without having that second verification. So I do agree with the point that it's important that you do change your password and you check that when you are approached, sometimes by scammers via the phone, and possibly even via the doorstep where you're encouraged to pay for things, do check every single step of the way. But I think that other parties like businesses can also help the consumers a lot better.
Yes, so looking at cybercrime, there are ways of protecting yourself, but in the end, you're not going to be able to stop all cybercrime.
Correct.
In the same way as you're not going to be able to stop other sorts of crime. That shouldn't, of course, be an excuse for not putting sensible measures in place. I mean, you do that with your home. You lock your house, even though some people are well equipped or well trained enough to be able to cut through your windows with a diamond-headed cutter. You know that, but you still lock the door because it will deter most thieves. In the same way, you should take reasonable steps. These people committing cybercrime, however, also have the issue that they may not see it as real crime.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this. We came across the issue of people copying DVDs. They say, "Well, we bought the DVD, and then we'll copy it and then sell it." So it's not real crime because I've made this DVD and I'm selling it, but the intellectual property wasn't yours, so therefore it was a crime. And in the same way, this using of information, doing things at a distance over the internet, can seem as though it's not a real crime, but it is to the victim, and it is really wrong to do. In fact, I could say, well, it's actually several of the Ten Commandments in one go sometimes.
Well, I was going to ask, what do you think is the source of this breaking of moral code? I mean, we talk about moral code. Cause society to end up in this.
Well, the thing is that there are moral codes. Any sort of activity or any sort of community develops, there's a moral code. Otherwise, the community wouldn't be able to function. You have to have certain limits put in place. Otherwise, you will never even have the community lasting out the day. So any people working together, there's going to be a moral code, or living together, there's going to be a moral code. But the best basic moral code, I mean, most of Western culture, I say all of Western culture, but most cultures recognise that this code is the basis, and that is the Ten Commandments. You should have no other gods but me. You should make no idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. It starts sort of a list of different things that you have to bear in mind. But it goes on to say some which are pretty straightforward and practical. You shall not steal is the eighth of the Ten Commandments. Well, that's a cybercrime. You shall not covet. So what other people have, that's part of cybercrime. You shall not bear false witness. That's really saying don't lie, and specifically, don't represent yourself in a hypocritical manner. So pretending to be someone else or stealing someone else's identity is directly going against the ninth commandment. So you've got what is that? That was 3 of the 10 commandments broken in one go. If you're committing cybercrime, where the desire to break these commandments comes from the human heart, of course. So still, the solution to this sort of crime and this sort of sin is the same as for any. People need to be changed from the inside out. You need to want the desire to do good, which only comes from faith in God and receiving God's Holy Spirit given through Jesus Christ. That's the only real way that we're going to have people changing their minds. Of course, people who don't believe can be good, but the number of people who will completely change their way of life is very few, unless they have that experience of meeting with God through Jesus Christ. But the desire to break these commandments is the desire for selfishness and for self-interest, which is deep within every human heart, I guess. So I don't have a technological solution for that one.
Yes. Well, it should be said as well that in terms of being able to tackle cybercrime, many establishments, whether it's government or police, have actually employed former criminals to basically fight against the former hackers and cyber crime communities, and that's actually working reasonably well. The idea is that you take a former hacker to try and beat their
well, I guess
their own game.
The hacking ability is like having a superpower. They're like superheroes. They could be supervillains, but they've chosen to fight for truth, justice, and the internet way. I'm not sure.
Well,
the information superhighway.
Well, look, listeners, we want to hear from you. Have you been a victim of cybercrime? Is this something that has affected you? Have you had money stolen or even your identity? Why not drop us a line on www.markandpete.com and let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So join us again for more topical topics with Mark and Pete.